Hello everyone, my name is Surajit Koyal and I'm a PhD student at the University of California, Santa Barbara. So my paper today is titled Metabolic City, Ecology, Infrastructure and Emergence in the East Kolkata Wetlands. So before I start, I want to thank SCOPE or the Society for Creative Opportunities and Participatory Ecosystems, a non-profit organization which works for the conservation of the East Kolkata wetlands, and SCOPE's director, Dhruva Dasgupta, who had actually introduced me to the wetlands 5 years earlier. And since then, she has been my main mentor and source of knowledge for this region. So much of the historical information for this paper and some of the images for the slides are actually drawn from her work. So let me get started and share my screen. Okay. A city is a metabolic infrastructure. So in this paper, I attempt to instantiate this statement as an argument as well as a method. Metabolism, in textbook understanding, is a biological process by which an organism sustains itself by converting food into energy and persists into the future. I elevate this definition to the scale of a city in order to perform a political ecology of urban systems. The tactic proves useful as a mode of doing urban ecological analysis. At its most basic, it opens up questions such as how does a city feed itself? Or how does it process its waste? And how does it survive into the future? These are urgent questions in the wake of climate change and the uncertain future of our Anthropocene cities. Metabolism, as a theory machine, gathers around itself key conceptual categories such as life and non-life, food and waste, ecology and infrastructure. So borrowing largely from urban ecology and critical infrastructure studies, my reading is predominantly diagnostic, but with a commitment towards more livable metabolic futures. In order to develop this analytic, I'll be reading through a rather rough ecological history of the city of Kolkata, more specifically the ecology of its wetlands. Like any other city in the world, Kolkata is a story of ecological and infrastructural emergence. It is located at the eastern state of West Bengal in India, adjacent to Bangladesh. Built around three small hamlets in the 18th century, which are these, Sutanuti, Kolikata, and Govindapur, by the British East India Company. It was an unlikely location for a city with its marshy lands, all this green stuff here, epidemic infestations, and unsanitary conditions. However, George Charnock, the company merchant who had chosen the location in 1690, understood its ecology well enough for its strategic advantages. Its proximity to the Bay of Bengal and the extensive network of rivers, particularly the Hooghly River stretching inland, allowed it to develop and flourish as a port city. Furthermore, the bordering rivers on two sides and the marshy wetlands on another provided the military advantage against competing European companies, the Nawab of Bengal, and other Indian attackers. Kolkata was actually developed as a military economic infrastructure of the 18th and 19th centuries. The network of rivers, creeks, and canals, which is a rough representation in this map from early 20th century, played a crucial infrastructural role in the early development of the city. I want to draw attention here briefly to the role played by canals as infrastructures of trade and commerce and their ecological impacts. Canals were to the 19th century what the railways were to the 20th, and in many ways what the shipping container is today, both of which have come into limelight in the wake of the recent Suez Canal incident, which, by the way, is a classic infrastructural incident in the sense of Susan Daystar, the way she defines infrastructure as something that works invisibly until it breaks down, such as the Ever Given ship stuck in the Suez Canal. Anyway, the establishment of the Calcutta port in 1870, for instance, swiftly followed on the heels of the opening of the Suez Canal in 1869 to accommodate the increased commerce between Europe and its colonies. But inland canalization actually began much earlier and was the lifeways of the British Empire. The Industrial Revolution provided the technology and the impetus for building canals throughout Britain in the 18th century. Because of its river-based ecology, the same model was used in Kolkata to build the network of creeks and canals. The most important of these was Tolley's Nala, or the Canal of Tolley, excavated by Colonel William Tolley between 1775 and 77. This Nala used to be an old course of the river Hooghly, known as the Adi Ganga, which had dried up. In this little map, it's this little branch from the main Hooghly river that flows here. But the Adi Ganga had been the major waterway of Indian trade and commerce for centuries and finds mention in medieval Bengali literature such as the Mongol Kapur. As the large stretch of the Ganges, it was considered sacred. Temples and villages had grown up along its banks, which survive till today. The channel had dried up before the arrival of the British, and the river took a different course to the sea. William Tolley had not only excavated the old riverbed, he also stretched it to connect the two rivers, the Hooghly and the Vidyadhari, that flanked the city. In this map, the Tolley's Nala is actually this dotted line which connects the Hooghly River here and the Vidyadhari River on the eastern side, to which I will come shortly. Okay. Earlier, before the Nala had been excavated, the boats from East Bengal or present-day Bangladesh had to navigate the treacherous waters of the Sundarbans, but this actually provided a safe and easy passage to Calcutta. Commerce bloomed with it, and Tolley made a fortune by collecting taxes at the rate of 1% for the price of the goods transported. Later, the operation of the canal was taken over by government in 1804, but its importance remained the same till after the arrival of the railways in the 1860s. Both Tolley's Nala and other canals rapidly deteriorated after this period due to siltation and neglect. It was later converted into an open sewer channel, but increased population pressure and continued neglect has turned it into an unsanitary ecology. As you see here, this is the present state of the Adi Ganga or the Tolley's Nala. More recently, the heavy pillars of an extension of the Kolkata Metro Railway were built right into the bed of the Adi Ganga, thus announcing a sort of death knell for its canal life. The river Vidyadhari is another key figure in Kolkata's economies of abandonment, to borrow the phrase from Elizabeth Pavinelli. The river coursed through the eastern flank of the city before discharging into the Bay of Bengal. Throughout the 18th century, the river served as an outfall for Kolkata's water discharge, thus helping it from the risk of monsoon floods. However, vigorous river engineering, increased population, and untreated water discharge meant the river had silted up rapidly and lost its navigational capacity. In 1928, the river was declared dead, and the government announced that it had no intention of maintaining it. The Adi Ganga and the Vidyadhari are examples of abandoned ecologies of the Anthropocene. I am inspired here to think further along with Pavinelli's formulation of geo-ontology that characterizes late liberalism. Pavinelli critiques and extends Foucauldian biopolitics to describe a political ecology suited for the Anthropocene era. She argues that biopolitical distinction of life and death is incapable of describing our current predicament. A larger distinction that subtends biopolitics, the distinction of life and non-life, is unraveling in the present moment. The climate crisis has revealed that life is not a given property of certain objects, but a political distribution in the governance of difference and markets. Such a formulation, what she calls geo-ontology, and its operation as geo-onto power, reveals non-human entities such as rivers, forests, or animals as political entities. The abundant ecologies of the Adi Ganga and the Vidyadhari rivers are, on the one hand, biopolitical examples of letting die, but on the other, it is subtended by a covered geo-ontology that recognizes them not as political life, but as natural resources that can be exploited and abandoned for the accumulation of capital. The death of the Vidyadhari River paved the way for the emergence of the East Kolkata wetlands, or the EKW, as an agricultural and waste processing infrastructure. You can see in this map here the borders of the EKW in close proximity to the city of Kolkata. A better map is actually this one, which is produced by Scope in partnership with the community villagers, and gives much more detailed information about the waste recycling boundary, the drainage stations, roads, railways, channels, etc. The EKW is a 125 square kilometer wetland area located at the eastern fringes of the city, which used to be the spill area of the dead Vidyadhari River. With the river gone, the wetlands received the majority of the wastewater from the city and treat it in a bioecological process, thus obviating the need for an expensive, energy-intensive wastewater treatment plant. The farmers of the wetlands use their traditional knowledge to treat the wastewater through the Veri or fish pond system. And here you can actually see a side view of the infrastructure. The fish pond system actually works in parceling water by strips of land. And here's a closer view of these ponds. Okay, the process involves storage of the sewage in large Veris for about 21 days. During this time, the sewage is broken down by algae and microbes who flourish under the hot tropical sun and the supply of sewage nutrients. Once the coliform bacteria is removed by the algae and microbes and the water becomes clear, fish species are introduced. They grow rapidly by feeding on the same microbes and nutrients from the water. External nutrients and pesticides are often applied to maintain production level. The level of the sewage in the ponds are carefully monitored and maintained through natural sluice gates made of bamboo. The ponds are often lined with water hyacinths to protect the narrow strips of land between them. The roots of the hyacinths also help purify the water by absorbing metallic particles. The adjacent lands are used to produce paddy and other vegetables. According to estimates, the EKW produces roughly 11,000 tons of fish a year and about 150 metric tons of vegetables per day. Furthermore, the wetlands serve as a high biodiversity area, accommodating a number of birds and animal species. It also absorbs roughly 60% of Kolkata's carbon emission and keeps the footprint low. Due to its close proximity, the fish and agricultural produce is easily transported to the city, sometimes on bicycles, without the need of any major transport infrastructure. This circular flow of waste turning into food and returning back to the city almost from within keeps food prices low in Kolkata, thus making it, in the words of Professor Dhrubajyoti Ghosh, an ecologically subsidized city. The EKW is an emergent ecology in the sense that it is a story of multi-species world making out of the ravages of the Anthropocene. It is a story of native engineering, an integrated wastewater management system through the passing of local knowledges and environmentalism of the poor. So how did this vital metabolic infrastructure come into being? I would not delve too deep into the history of the infrastructure just to stay within time, and I'll just do it in a couple of brief rough sketches. After the death of the Vidyadhari River during the early 20th century, the city was facing a severe crisis where it was threatening to drown in its own sewage. At this point, a Bengali engineer, Dr. B. N. Dey, led the construction of two artificial canals, the dry weather flow and the storm weather flow, which drained into another river, the Kulti, which flowed further east of the city. And these two canals are still the primary infrastructures of Kolkata's sewage discharge. Okay, simultaneously, it was discovered by local villagers and native entrepreneurs that sewage can be used for agricultural and piscicultural, that is fish cultivation purposes. Another engineer, Dr. P.C. Bose, had encouraged the agricultural practices by constructing lockets and arterial channels that facilitated the circulation of sewage into the fish ponds. For a long period during the second half of the 20th century, the infrastructure remained fully functional, but largely forgotten from both public and administrative memory. It took another engineer, Dr. Dhrubajyoti Ghosh, to rediscover the infrastructure and bring it into public recognition during the 80s and 90s. But by this time, with the rapid extension of the city, the wetlands were constantly shrinking due to development projects and real estate encroachment. Dr. Ghos's vigorous conservation efforts led to the recognition of the ecosystem in 2002 as a wetland of international importance by the Ramsar Organization of Wetland Conservation. Subsequently, the East Kolkata Wetland Management Authority was set up by the Kolkata Municipal Corporation to oversee its conservation and sustenance. So how do I define the ecology of the EKW in humanistic terms? What kind of infrastructure is this? Yes, I'll stop sharing the screen here and use this opportunity to develop a notion of metabolic infrastructure. Just a second. Okay, so metabolism in biology has long been recognized as the sign of life and difference from non-life. It is the process by which an organism converts food into energy and persists into the future. However, in the wake of more recent symbiotic theories in biology, proposed by scientists such as James Lovelock and Lynn Margulis, I am willing to see life as a process beyond the scale of the organism. Against the theories of Darwinian evolution and genetic essentialism that see the organism or the gene as a unit of life, Margulis and Lovelock see life as a planetary phenomenon that actively maintains the biosphere for its survival. Drawing from her research in bacterial evolution, Margulis points out the evolutionary history of multispecies collaboration for such life making. Such a formulation rejects the traditional differential logic of life and non-life. Objects such as a rock, a water body, or the sun are as much part of life as a human being or an animal. Margulis characterizes such life as symbiotic to stress the aspect of collaboration or coming together. Donna Haraway would further update this definition as symbiosis to stress on the aspect of active life making, or what she calls becoming with. The East Kolkata wetlands is a classic example of such multi-species world making. Forms of life as diverse as bacteria, algae, sunlight, water, plants, fish, and humans come together in a dynamic ecological assemblage to ensure symbiotic flourishing. What is at stake here is survival itself. Metabolism is, after all, the process of persistence into the future, what Bergson calls duration. It is a material form and process of time itself. The EKW as a metabolic infrastructure plays a key role in Kolkata's future. It evolved out of a crisis that was threatening the survival of the city, and it continues to ensure that survival. As the wetlands come under the threat of extinction from real estate encroachment, the triumph of life over non-life, it concerns the very survival of the city. Metabolism also undermines the ontological distinction between food and waste. As Hannah Landecker points out, metabolism is always an interlocking system into which multiple organisms participate. Thus, the waste of one organism serves as the food for another. This is nowhere more evident than in the EKW. The human waste becomes food for the algae and planktons, who become food for the fish. The fish again becomes food for the humans. Metabolism thus functions as cycles in nature. Overproduction or overexploitation of natural resources disrupt such metabolic cycles, an event that Marx calls metabolic rift in the process of social metabolism. As Landecker and Pavinelli would make the same point from different directions, metabolism is not merely a biological process, but something inherently social and political. In the EKW, waste becomes a resource from which value is produced. In fact, the current crisis at the EKW is that of sewage as capital. Large private fisheries seek to seize most of the sewage, thus depriving small farms and independent farmers of adequate sewage to continue farming. An emergent ecology is thus threatened to become completely integrated into the capitalist system of production. Before I conclude, I want to stay a moment longer with the notion of the EKW as a waste processing infrastructure. Waste is a challenging ontological object in that it threatens the very ontology of the self. The formation of self or identity is reliant on a concurrent denial of waste. Waste threatens the integrity and purity of the self. It can take numerous forms: psychic waste of unwanted thoughts and desires thrown into the unconscious, bodily waste quickly flushed down the toilet, social waste dumped out of sight, or electronic waste shipped to the global south. Waste thus marks a limit of the self, which, as Michel Taib argues brilliantly, it translates into a limit of the imagination. Waste infrastructure is the infrastructure in a fundamental sense. It operates invisibly. Its aesthetic is that of negation, not the spectacle of dams, bridges, or airports. However, as with any infrastructure, its invisibility depends on who is included and who is not. There are people whose lives are marked not by the invisibility of waste, but by its close proximity. This might include living close to the garbage dump, cleaning work in American buildings by immigrant workers in the night, or the rebellion of trash workers in Ghana. In India, the dehumanization of waste and waste workers has a deep-rooted, millennia-spanning infrastructure in the form of the caste system. Caste is a social infrastructure accompanied by a cosmology of hierarchy and domination. The lower caste people are consigned to waste work, to live and work in unsanitary conditions, and kept separate by practices of untouchability. In the East Kolkata wetlands, even though I have largely presented it as an ecology of life making, most of its residents are poor and lower class and caste farmers whose invisibilized labor supports the infrastructure for the emergence of the city as an upper class and caste spectacle of life. However, despite these embedded inequalities, or maybe because of them, the EKW is an infrastructure of non-capitalist value production, which is continually pushed towards disappearance through insidious forms of real estate encroachment and capitalist appropriation. To conclude here, what I've tried to do in this paper is to present metabolism as a vital material process that can also serve as a heuristic for humanistic and social scientific analysis of urban ecologies. This process is both ecological and infrastructural, and not merely biological. Between the scales of planetary metabolism and the metabolism of an organism, the city offers a middle ground to study metabolism as a socio-political phenomenon. Food and waste infrastructure can be seen as two of its main axes. I have chosen to focus on the EKW as the two axes converge here to give birth to a unique ecology. However, the convergence can take multiple forms, and any city would have its own unique ecologies. Metabolism has its own local histories and geographies, both of which require attention for a better understanding. The stakes, as I mentioned, cannot be higher. It concerns the future itself. Thank you.